Snow White. Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, made in 1937, was the very first full-length animated feature film ever. A groundbreaking work of cinema, but Walt Disney very carefully stripped away the nastier parts of the original Brothers Grimm tale. You thought Snow White just ate a bad apple? In the original, her stepmother wanted to eat her lungs and liver with salt and pepper. The Brothers Grimm collected oral folk tales in 1812 not to entertain kids, but to preserve German culture. These stories reflected the brutality of the real world through famine, jealousy, and violence. In medieval Europe, stepmothers and famine were recurring themes because parents often abandoned or even killed children when food ran out. These stories were warnings about envy and survival. In the original story, the queen orders the huntsman not just to kill Snow White, but to carve out her lungs and liver so she can eat them. The huntsman instead spared Snow White, which allowed her to flee and hide with the dwarfs. Although this did not stop the queen, as she makes 3 attempts on Snow White's life. First, she tried using a suffocating corset. Second, a poisoned comb which knocked her unconscious. And finally, the famous apple. Although Snow White isn't revived by true love's kiss, like in the original. Instead, a soldier who works for the prince was so fed up of carrying her unconscious body that he hit her back so hard that the apple dislodges from her throat. The prince was so happy at her awakening that he married her on the spot. At their wedding, the queen is forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she dies. Cinderella. Disney's Cinderella, released in 1950, is the ultimate rags to riches fairy tale. After years of cruelty from her wicked stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella is given a magical transformation by her fairy godmother. With the help of a glass slipper, she captures the heart of Prince Charming and escapes her life of servitude. Surprisingly, the Cinderella story is hundreds of years old and appears in Chinese, Egyptian, and Greek traditional stories. Disney's version followed Charles Perrault's 1697 story, which was already softened for French aristocrats, which is why Disney didn't have to make too many changes. The real and dark Cinderella you clicked on this video for comes from the one Brothers Grimm made in 1812. The Brothers Grimm yet again leant back into darkness to reflect harsh realities of greed and cruelty in poor households. In this version of Cinderella, there is no fairy godmother. Instead, Cinderella's magic comes from a tree grown on top of her mother's grave, where she prays day after day. Fortunately, her prayers are answered, and doves come swooping down, blessing her with dresses of silver and gold. She still has a dad who is good for nothing, and watches as she is reduced to nothing but a servant in her own home. When the king announces the famous ball, her own stepsisters mock and laugh at her, saying she can only go if she sorts seeds from ashes. Given the help of the doves, she succeeds. In this story, Cinderella still loses her famous glass slipper, although her stepmom forces the stepsisters to go to extreme lengths to ensure they fit the slippers, having one of them cut off her own toes and the other her own heel. The prince was originally fooled, but noticed when the birds pointed out the blood pouring from the shoe, a slightly more gruesome interpretation than the Disney scene. After all this, he thought he'd try the maid, which he soon found out was the mystery princess all along. In Disney movie fashion, they got married quickly. Although this did not stop the stepsisters from trying to get to the prince, as they were shamelessly pretending to be nice to Cinderella. As punishment, the doves took not one but both of the stepsisters' eyes. A scene you do not usually see in your average Disney movie. The Little Mermaid. Disney's The Little Mermaid, released in 1989, revived the studio and launched the Disney Renaissance. It tells the story of Ariel, a young mermaid who dreams of life on land. After making a deal with the sea witch Ursula, she trades her voice for legs, finds true love with Prince Eric, and wins her happily ever after. The original Anderson's The Little Mermaid, made in 1837, which wasn't just about the romance and happily ever after. It was about the desire for a human soul. In Anderson's theology, mermaids can live for up to 300 years, but when they die, they simply dissolved into sea foam, disappearing forever. Humans, however, have immortal souls. The Little Mermaid can only gain an immortal soul if the prince falls in love with her. After saving the prince and falling in love with him, she goes to the witch, who tells her that the price of becoming human will bring immense pain. Her tongue is then cut out, and although she now has human legs, every step she takes feels like knives stabbing into her feet. And if that wasn't bad enough, If the prince does not choose to marry the Little Mermaid, she will dissolve into sea foam. Despite all of the pain the princess is in, she still dances for the prince to attempt to win his love. Although it is not enough, when the prince chooses to marry the princess, believing she was the one who saved him. Heartbroken, the Little Mermaid is given one final choice: kill the prince with a dagger, let his blood run on her feet, and return to the sea, or die. But she refuses to harm the man she loves and throws herself into the waves, dissolving into foam. Although Anderson, unable to resist a twist, adds that she transforms into a daughter of the air, a spirit who can eventually earn a soul after 300 years of good deeds. Not exactly the sing-along ending you grew up with. Sleeping Beauty. Disney's Sleeping Beauty, released in 1959, tells the story of Princess Aurora, cursed by Maleficent to prick her finger and fall asleep. Only true love's kiss from Prince Philip can wake her, leading to Maleficent's defeat and Aurora's happily ever after. The Grimm brothers, who should be a familiar name in this video, surprisingly has a very similar storyline to the Disney. The one we'll be talking about is the earliest version of this story. Giambattista Basile's son, Moon, and Talia from 1634, makes Maleficent's curse look like a light inconvenience. This story is one of the darkest in all fairy tale history. At birth, astrologers predicted that her demise will come from a splinter of flax. Given this warning, her father orders that all plants be removed from the palace immediately. One day, a completely unaware peddler woman starts spinning fabric right outside the castle, and for some strange reason, the princess decides to bring her in. Ever heard of the saying, curiosity killed the cat? In this case, Talia is the cat. Unaware of the potential dangers, she touches the spindle, gets a splinter, and dies on the spot. The princess isn't awakened by a kiss at all. A passing king finds her unconscious, and instead of helping her, he assaults her. She becomes pregnant while asleep and months later gives birth to twins. One of the babies sucks the cursed splinter from her finger, accidentally reviving her. When she awakened, she was happy to be alive, but confused as to why two babies were around her. The king who did these horrible things to Talia returns and tells her everything he did. In a dark twist, Talia wasn't mad, but instead their relationship grew much stronger. After spending some time together, the king mentions he has to leave to go see his wife. Suspicious of where he has been, the wife finds out that the king has been lying to her. Furious, she orders that the babies be kidnapped and cooked and fed to the king in a grotesque act of revenge. Fortunately, the cook spared the babies and instead feeds the king some lamb. Still furious, the queen requires that Talia is burnt alive. The king, hearing Talia's screams, storms in to find that not only is the queen about to burn his true love, but that she just made him eat his own two kids. Fuming, he throws the queen into the fire, ready to do the same to the chef next. But remember how I said the chef fed the king lamb? He was hiding the two kids this whole time. In fairy tale fashion, the king marries Talia, the chef is rewarded for his actions, and they all live happily ever after. Beauty and the Beast. Disney's Beauty and the Beast, released in 1991, was the crown jewel of the Disney Renaissance. It became the first animated film ever nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. The movie tells the story of Belle, a clever young woman in a small village who longs for adventure. After her father is imprisoned by a fearsome beast in a mysterious castle, Belle sacrifices her freedom to save him. Over time, she discovers kindness in the beast's heart, their love blossoms, and the spell is broken, restoring the prince and his enchanted servants to their human form. The original story, however, was not a tale of romance, but of obedience and duty. The earliest written version comes from French author Gabrielle Suzanne de Villeneuve in 1740, later shortened in 1756 by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont. These tales weren't created to warm hearts. They were written as lessons for young women entering arranged marriages, teaching them to accept and eventually love their husbands, no matter how beastly. Could you imagine being forced to be with someone you don't even like? In the Beaumont version, Belle is not the daughter of an inventor, but instead a once wealthy merchant who has fallen on hard times after many of his ships are wrecked at sea by large storms. This ruined their financial situation, forcing them to move into poverty. Feeling guilty, the father bravely ventures into the beast's estate, stealing a rose for his daughter. Enraged, the beast demands payment, either the merchant's life or one of his daughters in his place. Belle bravely volunteers, moving into the beast's castle. Unlike the Disney version, where Belle's love grows through the kindness she sees in the beast, the original tale paints Belle as a prisoner who gradually becomes resigned to her fate. Every night, the beast asks her to marry him, and every night she refuses. Though he is not cruel to her, the The constant pressure and isolation had huge mental impacts on Belle. Eventually, the Beast let Belle temporarily return home. Despite their sister being home after being imprisoned, Belle's sisters were jealous. Because not only did Belle not mind their family's fall from wealth, but when Belle returned home from the Beast's castle, she was dressed in fancy clothes and looked happier than she ever has. They couldn't stand that she was living better than them. Out of spite, they planned to keep her home for as long as they could, hoping the Beast's anger would lead to her death. The sisters' plan worked, and Belle was forced to rush back to the castle. Upon the arrival, she finds the Beast, who is on the verge of death, wasting away from the idea that Belle had left him. This traumatic experience led Belle to realize that she has fallen in love with him, and in that moment agrees to marry him. It is only then that the curse is broken, and the Beast transforms into a handsome prince. Pinocchio. Disney's Pinocchio, released in 1940, was the studio's second animated feature and remains one of its most beloved classics. It tells the story of a wooden puppet brought to life by the Blue Fairy, who must prove himself brave, truthful, and unselfish in order to become a real boy. Guided by Jiminy Cricket, Pinocchio overcomes temptation, defeats villains like Stromboli and Monstro the Whale, and is rewarded with becoming real. But the original adventures of Pinocchio, written by Italian author Carlo Collodi in 1883, was far from a cheerful coming-of-age tale and did not have the typical happy ending of a story. Collodi's story was a harsh story meant to scare children into obedience. From the very beginning, Pinocchio is cruel and reckless. As soon as Geppetto carves him, the puppet mocks his maker, steals his wig, and runs away. Instead of guiding him gently, Collodi punishes Pinocchio brutally for his disobedience. Early on, when Pinocchio meets the talking cricket, which was the inspiration for Jiminy, he doesn't listen to his advice. Instead, he smashes him against the wall with a hammer, killing him. Geppetto, fed up with Pinocchio's behavior, spends the remainder of his money on a school book and sends him to school. Based on Pinocchio's previous actions, do you think he will obey this request? If you said no, you would be correct. He instead sells this book and uses it to buy a ticket to a puppet show. At the puppet show, he is nearly burned alive, and later nearly fried in a pan. In search of more mischief, he comes across a fox and a cat, who trick him into planting gold coins, believing they will grow into a tree of riches. When he realizes he's been scammed, he tries to fight back, but the cat and fox catch him, tie his arms, put a noose around his neck, and hang him from a tree. Pinocchio's death is the end of the story, or so it was meant to be. Fans were outraged. They pushed Collodi to continue the story and redeem Pinocchio with a proper ending. Even so, his trials remain brutal. He is nearly burned alive when he falls asleep too close to a fire, almost fried in a pan by a fisherman who mistakes him for a fish, and repeatedly starved, beaten, and humiliated.